So what if I told you that your opinion not only did not matter, but that you were prohibited from sharing your opinion in any way? Any way at all. No Facebook posts, no town hall meetings, no letters to the editor, no calls to Right Side Radio, nothing at all. Your opinion is forbidden, and if they want your opinion, they'll tell you what it is. Now, some of you may be thinking you're feeling that way right now. Well, you're not by a long shot. In fact, your voice may be your greatest weapon. And it doesn't have to mean that you're always right, or that your resume is the strongest, or that you have some amazing pedigree or some advanced diploma from an elite university. The voice of the average citizen is still one of the greatest forces for freedom anywhere in the world, especially here, where the argument exists that the freedom of speech is an actual right, not a privilege, but a right. So before I go any further, let me be straight up. If you're told that your opinion is out of order, unwanted, unnecessary, or that you should go sit in a corner and be quiet, well, you have a decision to make. Do you go away and not make a sound that could ruffle a feather or two? Or do you speak up knowing that the Founding Fathers took this very question into consideration and decided that the very first amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the very first one, should preserve the right to voice your opinion? I say don't go quietly. Now, let me be clear on something. The fact that you can speak doesn't mean that you should. No, I'm not crawfishing here. There's a lot to be said for having the wisdom and the maturity to know when to bridle your tongue and when to just let her rip. And once you speak, you need to be able to ably defend your opinion. You need to be able to back it up. I mean, don't go quietly, but don't go off half-cocked is what I'm saying. It reminds me of an amazing man that I read about once. His name was Watchman Nee. It's an unusual name, I know. I don't know if you ever heard his story, all of which is true. I mean, there needs to be a feature-length movie about the life of Watchman Nee. So, Watchman Nee was a Chinese citizen born in 1903. This was in the pre-communist era, and Christianity was kind of grudgingly accepted as part of society, with missionary schools being very common in certain parts of China. Watchman Nee, whose birth name was Ni Tosheng, he became a Christian in 1920 when he was 17 years old. He immediately began making waves in Chinese society. Over time, he wrote numerous books. He helped to found a non-denominational church that focused on meetings in homes and small groups. The name of his church was loosely translated as the Little Flock. But it grew, and it was not really that little when taken in its totality. At one point, it was estimated that upwards of 1 million citizens of China had adopted the Christian faith, and of those, 10% were members of Watchman Nee's Little Flock. When the Communist Party came to power in 1949, religion fell out of favor, and like many others, Watchman Nee was deemed suspect, and his opinions were heresy. He became a target of the Chinese Communist Party government, but at every step he maintained his faith and spoke about it openly. In 1952, he was arrested and imprisoned, and over the next few years, in a series of kangaroo courts, he was eventually charged and convicted with conspiring to do damage to the Communist Party. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison with labor for the purpose of reform and education. For what? For having a faith. For having a faith-based worldview. For having a willingness to speak it into the public square. Except that their efforts to reform and re-educate him, they didn't work. Watchman Nee would not be quiet. I'm told that at one point the party officials in charge of his imprisonment had to switch out guards every day because he kept leading them to Christianity. So they would send in a new guard, and Nee would lead them to faith in Christ, and they would have to send in a new one. In 1967, Nee's sentence was due to be over, but the Communist Party refused to let him go. Without further sentencing, he was deemed too dangerous, and so they delayed and delayed for 5 more years, and Watchman Nee actually died in prison in 1972. Now, you might think that sounds like a sorry end to a difficult life, but his legacy, the legacy that came from speaking out, the legacy that came from living his faith in the public eye, that's said to be the root of over 10 million Chinese Christians who trace their faith back to the ministry of Watchman Nee, according to statistics that were compiled by the World Christian Database. Over 3,000 churches worldwide have used his teachings. He wrote 62 books. He was honored by the U.S. Congress in 2009. He was honored in March of last year, 2023, by the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. My point is this: If you believe in something that you have committed to in the deepest of senses, whether a matter of faith or principle or ideas on culture or whatever, it's not enough just to shout words and walk away. It's also certainly not appropriate to remain quiet. And there's no time in a world filled with social media posts and 24/7 sound bites for people who are shallow in their beliefs. You have to know what you believe and be willing to speak it. And I would strongly suggest to you that your faith in the public square, even in politics, is okay. But to do that, I want to first encourage you, become a student of what you believe. Be able to not just say it, but actually explain it. If you're questioned, be able to dialogue about it. If offended, be able to counter the offense with a reasonable response. And when told to be quiet, give some strong consideration to speaking out anyway. You see, liberal arguments, they often defy reason. They defy science. They defy the ideas of faith. But they will shout those arguments nonetheless, and they will shout them even louder when you don't back down. But when they are truly faced with someone who has the strength of their convictions to match the statements that they're making, they often, the left, doesn't know what to do. So I say gear up and study up and speak up. Liberals are demanding our silence so often these days. And I don't intend to go quietly in the night, and you shouldn't either. And there's 10 million Chinese Christians who are glad that Watchman Nee never stopped speaking up. But you may be thinking, okay, well, that's communist China, Phil. I mean, I live in the US of A, where I have rights. I have the right to my freedom of speech, the right to my freedom of worship, and yes, you do. And something that good is always worth defending, and something that good, by the way, will always be attacked. And the fact that you have rights, it does not mean that we should become complacent. I mean, remember, Watchman Nee became a Christian in a China that had no communism. His country changed. His political leaders changed. The attacks on his faith changed. They became very real. At a time when people needed to speak out, he was one of the few that would. Well, in one of those too weird to be true, but yet it is moments, Kamala Harris recently just dissed on all Christians everywhere. I mean, first she chose not to attend the Albert Smith Memorial Charity Dinner put on by the Catholic Archdiocese of New York City. Okay, it was an event. She skipped it. I guess it can be written off as like, I'm too busy that night, or I have to do my hair. But then came, though, the moment in one of her recent rallies when a young man yelled out, "Jesus is Lord!" And she got that kind of smarmy, I'm about to school you look that she gets sometimes, and she said, "Oh, I think you came to the wrong rally." And while the audience laughed and jeered, she felt empowered by her ill-timed and misguided secular sense of humor. And she said, "I think you meant to go to the smaller rally down the street." And the audience howled and guffawed, and she looked so proud. But then reality began to set in as it began to be reported nationwide. She had so glibly mocked a man for shouting, "Jesus is Lord," and she even implied that the message was better suited to go to the Trump-Vance rally across town. In one fell swoop, Kamala Harris told Christian voters their faith-based political views were not welcome in her camp. Christians everywhere need to take note of that. Some years ago, while I was in the state Senate, a bill came up that dealt with pro-life issues. I don't remember which one in particular. There were several pro-life bills that I either carried or co-sponsored. But I do remember the opposition. And there was one lady in particular who was absolutely spiteful. I mean, just really obnoxious. I mean, vitriol against the pro-life measures always came across as mean-spirited personal attacks, but she was like an absolutely bitter person, and it showed. On one occasion, I was accused of doing the most heinous of things, the most unforgivable. I was accused of letting my faith mix with my politics. Say it ain't so, Phil. You didn't really act like a Christian in the public realm, did you? Well, I hope I did. You see, when I got elected to represent Alabama Senate District 10, I was not elected to be less than who I am. I ran as a conservative, as a patriot, and I ran as an unabashed believer in Christ. Why would I leave that at home? If my faith is the most important thing to me and makes me who and what I am, then how could I possibly not take it with me into politics? I mean, of course I took it into my politics. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't. The truth is, hear me when I say this, we had better mix our faith with our politics. We had better pray about our vote. We had better mix our faith-based values and traditions and principles with our politics, because if we don't take those positions of faith in the public square, then someone else is going to take just the opposite into the public square. I recently attended an Alabama Policy Institute annual dinner. Dr. Ben Carson was a speaker, did a wonderful job. And at one point he said something that I thought was profound, and so I made a note of it. I took the note down in my phone so that I wouldn't forget it. Speaking about faith, Ben Carson said, quote, "It is said that there are two things we should never talk about in public, politics and religion. But those are the two things we must talk about," he said, "because those are where we're being attacked." And he's so right. And I'll go one step further. In my opinion, not only should we talk about those two things, but I believe that we absolutely 100% unequivocally should talk about them together. You see, Christians need to care about who's elected to make and enforce the laws that govern our country. Christians need to not only care about who's elected, but Christians need to also vote their faith and run for office and seek the opportunity to carry their faith into the public square. It's really simple. Either we as Christians speak out about our faith, or those who don't believe what we believe will speak out about our faith. I'd rather it be us than them. Having said all that, though, a recent study came out. Pollster George Barna, he did a survey and determined that inexplicably 104 million Americans will not be voting in this coming election. But most notably to me, though, is that among those 104 million, there are 32 million self-identified Christians who are expected to sit the election out. Just sit it out for one reason or another. They just won't likely make it to the polls. I mean, some will have reasonable excuses like health or travel or job conflicts, but the bulk of those non-voting Christians are just sitting it out. The most common reason for the non-voting Christians, 68% of that 32 million said, quote, "a lack of interest in politics and elections." Y'all, that's almost 22 million Christians who say it's just not their bag. Just doesn't get their attention. They're just not into it. Wow. Well, Dr. Jeff Myers, he's an author, a speaker, he's the president of Summit Ministries. He recently talked about this. He said basically, if you don't know the candidates, if you don't know all the issues, then at very least consider what he calls constitutional principles like life, liberty, and property. Because, in his words, those are the three things the Constitution said it is developed in order to provide. Now, he went on to say, how do I support life with my voice? How about liberty? Things like religious liberty and free speech. What about property? Who's going to be most likely to think that people ought to have their own property, their own businesses? He said, because there are a lot of worldviews out there, let's be honest. There are worldviews who say the abolition of private property would be a preferable state. What? So any candidate for any given office is going to be most likely to lessen the evils that occur around life, liberty, or property. That's who you need to vote for. That's an idea, he said, that will help you inform your decision. And he's right. Life, liberty, property. If you don't know all the answers, if you don't know all the candidates, if it's really not your bag, but you also recognize that you're a Christian and you need to vote, then you look at it from life, liberty, property. Who is going to commit the less amount of evil, if you will, upon those issues? Well, I'll take it a step forward from there too. I would say we are also called to be good stewards. You see, we can look at the parable of the talents. Jesus told the story in Matthew 25 of the ruler who left on a trip and he gave 3 of his servants some money. 2 of them took care of what they'd been given. They invested it, they worked, they grew the ruler's resources. But one of them, he just sat on it. He buried it. And then he tried to say later that he just didn't want to take the risk. So he just sat on it and did nothing. And he was the one who was seen as not worthy. The implications in that story are many, but one of the outcomes of that story is stewardship. Good stewardship of that which we've been entrusted is not only sought, it is expected. What will we do with this country that we've been given? Will we as Christians take bold action and grow it and shepherd it and be good stewards of it? Or will we sit on our haunches and just wait to see what happens? Look, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the one in the end who realizes that I had an opportunity to do something to advance this great nation in a way that increases our capabilities, enhances our strength, protects life, liberty, and property. But instead, I just did nothing? Listen, our faith is not based on works. I believe that. I believe that my salvation is assured because I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. No other way. But there's two parts to being a Christian. There's making him your Savior, and then there's making him Lord of your life. My salvation is assured, and if I did nothing else, I believe I'd go to heaven. But y'all, if I did nothing else, what would others see? What good would I do? What difference would I make? You see, sometimes Christians need to be busy about being Christians. Not in a braggadocious, ostentatious way, but in a real and practical way. In James 2:18, we're told that faith and works go together because that's the visual reminder to the world that we believe. It says, but someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works. I'll show you my faith by my works. Christians, listen to me. Faith and politics, they do go together, like a hand and a glove. If you sit this one out, you're wrong. Get up, get busy, go to the polls, and vote your faith. Vote like your faith depends on it, because maybe your ability to freely exercise your faith in the public arena might actually depend on it. Watchman Nee never stopped speaking. His government didn't like it one bit. And millions of people had their lives changed because Watchman Nee chose to speak. If we are going to be good stewards of what God has given us, if we're going to be good stewards of this country, then voting is a part of it. You show me your faith without your works, I'll show you my faith by my works. And what I'm saying is, voting is one of those works. Faith and politics, they go well together. That's my philosophy.